What was the best thing the quiet kid has said or done in class? My wife told me of a really quiet kid in her class. No one ever heard him speak because he has some sort of mental thing and the teacher knew not to call on him. The last week of school this kid finally speaks. 100% British. This is in the cornfields of the Midwest. The quiet kid in my class was sorta bullied by this kid who had a cleft chin. One day the cleft chin guy insulted the quiet kid, and the quiet kid came back with the insult, "Is your mouth so filthy because someone ducked you in the chin?" It was 6th grade and the whole table, we were seated as groups, busted out laughing. It was a dirty joke, so check, and it was aimed at a bully, double check. He became known as the chin ducked kid, which was hilarious to us 6th graders. A little short blonde girl with a really high-pitched voice read a poem she wrote about how death is unescapable and everyone will die. We're in health class, on the topic of domestic abuse. Somehow the subject turns to how Britney Spears received backlash for abusing her kids. Kid in the back says, probably because she hit her baby one more time. 6th grade science class, teacher was out of the room and we were ducking around with hot plates. While messing around, one of my classmates burns his hand pretty bad on a hot plate and has to go to the nurse. Right after he leaves the room, quiet kid enters and casually says, "Smells like burnt flesh in here," and just sits down like it was nothing. Everyone turned and just stared at him. 7th grade, new kid named Nick started school halfway through the year. He sat next to me in English class and didn't say anything ever. One day, we were reading poems out loud and critiquing each other. One sorry fella read his, and every line started with, "If I was a bird. If I was a bird, I'd live in a tree. If I was a bird, I'd fly to school. If I was a bird." A few people offered polite criticism. The teacher called on Nick for his opinion, and he said, "If I was a bird, I'd poop on all of you." He got kicked out of class and I still laugh every time I think about it. We became friends and he was actually a pretty nice guy. I think he just couldn't resist making that joke. We had a kid at our high school who refused to speak for the entirety of our high school career, even if a teacher called on him. The day we graduated he spoke for the first time. His reasoning for his 4 years of silence was just because I could. Beat the stuff out of the kid that kept poking / touching / slapping at him. I think it was around the 7th time he said, "Dude, please stop," before the blood came. It wasn't in class, but during our high school's variety show my senior year, this quiet guy who typically sat in the back of class and didn't really chat it up with anyone, played the most epic guitar solo ever. It was amazing. Still remember it 10 years later. One time we had a huge man for a guest speaker, and when he arrived he was eating a foot long and his excuse was he missed breakfast, and the quiet kid muttered, "I ducking doubt that." Almost exactly like from Trailer Park Boys. There was a girl who went the entirety of middle school never speaking a word unless absolutely necessary. One day the class was being rowdy while the teacher was out of the room and in the raspiest, deepest voice ever yelled, "Shut up." We all shut up. The dorky short pudgy kid was being bullied by the really popular class jock. Dork rushed the jock, pulled his shirt over his head and began beating him pretty good hockey style. The jock actually transferred schools the next year. Not sure if it was because of that or what, but he wasn't popular anymore. Not in school, but I teach middle to high school kids, 13 to 17, how to umpire baseball games. There was one kid, 13 years old, who was very quiet, reserved, and shy, and I thought, this is not the vocation for him. A week later I swing by the field to evaluate him and see if I can help him with anything. I arrived about 5 minutes after the game started and I could hear loud, confident, and definitive calls coming from this kid. I was floored. His mom came up to me and said that becoming an umpire has completely changed his personality. Friend was the quiet kid. In high school drafting class, back when drafting was done on paper, there was another kid harassing him from across the room. He took his T-square, about 2 feet long, made of wood, sharp edges, and whipped it across the room, hitting his harasser square on the side of the head. The resulting head wound required several stitches. Smart, nerdy, quiet kid in the front of class, always answered questions correctly when called on. One day the teacher calls on him, and before he even answers, the teacher just lazily says correct and turns back around to write on the board. The second the teacher turns around, the quiet kid just rockets his pencil upward into the ceiling like an arrow. The teacher doesn't notice. It was just such a sudden, unexpected act of rebellion from the quiet kid that never said anything. The whole class saw it, and by the time the teacher turned around, the quiet kid was playing it cool as ice and taking notes again. The teacher doesn't notice. Finally the teacher turns around again to ask another question, and the entire class is trying not to laugh and everyone is trying not to look at the pencil stuck into the ceiling. The teacher still doesn't notice. A couple of people laugh, and every time the teacher asked what is so funny. The situation became even more hilarious. Finally the teacher turns around again and continues the lesson, completely oblivious. It was boring math class, and it was the funniest thing that happened all year. Classmates used to throw crumpled paper balls at her every day because they knew she wouldn't react. One day she started picking them up, spitting on them, and throwing them back. The teacher just smiled and watched. Edited to add context, the teacher was no nonsense and regularly yelled at and gave detention to those stuff kicker kids. But, being stuffed kickers, none of that ever stopped them. So when quiet girl decided to step up, he just let her do her thing. When I was a kid I was obsessed with The Simpsons, and one day I kept narrating everything in the Duffman voice. Duffman says, "Oh yeah, etc." Eventually the quiet kid next to me stood up and screamed, "Shut the duck up. I don't give a duck what the Duffman says." He got in trouble and I didn't, cause the teacher hadn't heard any of my Duffman quotes. I still think about him sometimes. I'm sorry man, I was being so annoying and you didn't deserve to get in trouble. Sorry if this is anticlimactic. It was something that was a lot better if you went through it, haha. There was a quiet kid in my class and he always got up 5 minutes before class ended every day, like to the exact second. One day he got up 20 minutes before class and I stuff you not, the whole class gasped. When the teacher asked him where he was going, he responded, "I need to go check my blood sugar a little earlier today because I'm going home early to visit Disney." Kid was so quiet, no one even knew he was diabetic. He didn't mention it ever. LOL. Quiet kid in my theater class, there for the crew type jobs. Our teacher asks us questions daily, and the day's question was, "What's your favorite Easter candy, or normal candy if you don't celebrate?" One kid said chocolate bunnies, and the teacher asked what they liked it filled with. Kids chimed in with stuff like peanut butter, or marshmallow cream. But this girl just says organs. In the most monotone voice imaginable. Geometry teacher was bragging about how well he drew circles and going on about how one day he would draw a perfect circle. He asked us what would happen if he drew a perfect circle. "My friend, a sweet, quiet girl says rather loudly, you die." Can't really remember the reaction of the class, but I laughed and the teacher looked totally crushed.